All right. Well, welcome everybody to the third virtual panel of Hats Off for Headwaters 2022. Hats Off for Headwaters is the annual fundraiser for Colorado Headwaters Land Trust, a local land trust based here in Grand County, Colorado. This is the third of three virtual panels this week. The first being on Monday was a conversation between myself and Eric Friels, who is the new district ranger of the Sulphur Ranger District in Arapahoe National Forest, which is our local forest here in Middle Park in the Grand County area. And that was a great conversation. We had a really good conversation between the two of us, and then some of the audience had questions as well. That is recorded and on our website as well as on our YouTube page. Yesterday, we didn't have a panel, but I gave kind of a crash course on conservation easements and land trusts and conservation in general, which I heard the feedback and people really enjoyed that. And that recording is also online. And then this one will be as well. This week culminates on Sunday with the in-person celebration of Hats Off for Headwaters, held at Casa Vista, a venue outside of Fraser, on Sunday afternoon, the 18th. If you are interested, I believe there are still tickets available. And there's a silent auction running all week that'll end at the end of that in-person event. There will be a live auction. I will be giving a presentation on a major project that we're working on, which I'll talk about later this evening. And but then also, if you want to come and meet our board and staff in person and meet other neighbors of yours here in Grand County, you are, of course, welcome to join us. If you are interested in attending and have not purchased tickets, please reach out, either send us a chat, go to our website, coloradoheadwaterslandtrust.org, or email info at coloradoheadwaterslandtrust.org. And with that, we'll go into our third panel. This panel every year is what I call the Land Trust panel. We have members of our board and members of our staff here, and we're going to talk about how we all came to the Land Trust, some of our views of conservation and where we live here in Grand County, mainly so people get to know their local land trust, their local organization. It's something I spoke about yesterday. There were a few questions about how to talk to your neighbors and how to talk to the land trust to achieve this common goal of conservation. And it really comes down to just knowing your neighbor and knowing the people who are working for conservation. And so you can see on the screen, we have one staff member and 4 board members here. And so for everyone here, I'll just call on you, and if you could give a brief introduction, and then we'll go into some structured questions. So just on my screen, Ray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Ray Analonis. I was just recently, I recently joined the Land Trust this past summer. I've been following it from time to time, and been intrigued by their progress and their mission. Certainly the trust itself has an outstanding board, and certainly like their goals. My wife and I bought a ranch in western Grand County about 16 years ago, and we actually have a headwater stream coming through. It's called Battle Creek, which originates in the National Forest and flows through our property and ultimately connects with the Williams Fork. So with that in mind, this was kind of intriguing to see this land trust and what it's done. So we're pretty excited about the future, and certainly, the Colorado River has gotten a lot of press lately, and we're kind of at the forefront of what's going on. Certainly it's the key to a lot of things that go on downstream. So with that, that's my story. I was involved with a couple of university foundations and trustees in the past few years. So I have some nonprofit experience that hopefully I can bring to this group. So thank
Excellent. You. Thank you, Ray. Paula.
Good evening. I'm Paula Stewart. I'm the president of the board. This is my second year as president. And if you had told me, my husband's fond of saying, I don't know, 10 years ago that I'd be living in Colorado permanently, I would have said, what? From the East Coast, I've always lived in the East Coast and been involved in conservation, both professionally and and also as a volunteer for some 18 years when I lived in New Jersey. And my husband and I moved here, well, just 3 years ago into the house that we now live in, but we moved here a little over 3 years ago. And I am very interested in preservation and conservation. And as Jeremy described last night, they can be different, but the amount of development that's going on in Grand County and the small percentage of land that is actually available to put a conservation easement on because of all of the federal and state property gives me a lot of impetus for moving forward and trying to do whatever I can for this organization. And since it's centered and primarily is in Grand County, to me, it makes more sense to use my time where I live. So.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kilpella. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
Okay. I am also a relatively new board member, having joined over the last few months. I actually made my own introduction into the land trust because I come from more of a finance investment background and really am trying to kind of pivot my career into more conservation minded and environmentally minded investments and finance. And through that have been taking sustainability and conservation classes at Harvard. And so I loved my land conservation class and got really enthused by it. And so I actually emailed Jeremy and said, hey, we spend a portion of our time up in Grand County. And so I just said, I'm really interested in this, would love to be a part and help out and lend my finance skills to the extent possible. And so I'm really aligned with the mission, and I love the mission of conservation, especially in Grand County. I think there's a lot of conservation values to be had within Grand County. So it's been a joy to be able to join and both offer kind of my expertise, but also have this really strong passion for protecting the beauty and the conservation values within Grand County.
Excellent, thank you. Stuart.
Hi, I'm Stuart McNabb. I'm I think the longest tenured member of the board. I joined the board in January of 2016. I've owned land in Grand County since 1983. We moved up here full time in 2014. And over the years, we've often heard people say about development, at least in the eastern part of the county, boy, we don't want to become Silverthorne. And I think if you drive between Winter Park and Fraser now, or between the ski area and Winter Park, you'd say maybe Silverthorne got it right. But I don't think so. But we have, as Paula said, there's a limited amount of land to protect. The development pressures are just becoming huger and huger. And so my interest in this organization is to try and protect as much as we can. Certainly the stuff that you see as you drive across the county, the vistas that we have and the agricultural land, I think are part of the huge appeal of Grand County, and we should do everything we can to protect them.
For sure.
Beautiful. And finally, Quillen.
Hello, I'm Quillen. I'm the only, I think, other staff member on this call, and I'm our communications and development manager. I just got hired back in March, so I'm relatively new, I guess, on staff, although the 6 months have flown by pretty quickly. Yeah, and I got into conservation. I moved out to Colorado in 2018 to do my grad degree at DU and to study environmental science, sociology, and communications all in one. And I went through a social work degree to do that. But I always was looking into nonprofit management and not working directly with people, but more working on land conservation and wildlife conservation. Applied to the land trust. And I think in terms of seeing where it goes and grows, I would love to, I don't know, widen our reach to the Front Range specifically. I know as like living out in Denver and being a student here, we tend to like not think about where our resources come from when we live in the city. We don't really think about the other counties in the mountains except for when you go there for a day hike. So I'd love to bring what I'm learning from the land trust into the city. Yeah. And Hodor, my bird, is here too, but he has decided to go rogue, but he'll appear shortly, I'm sure.
Well, if I have any questions for him, I'll be sure to call him out.
He's an unpaid intern. You don't need to hear from him.
That's great. Well, thank you, and thank you all for joining us. I'll give myself a brief introduction. Jeremy Krones, I'm the executive director of the Land Trust. I was hired in 2018, almost 4 years ago to the day. And I come from a varied background of playing outside, assistant forest ranger and farmer and cowboy, and decided to make money, so I joined the nonprofit world. And the land trust, private land conservation really drew me. And so I started looking at land trusts, and in the Intermountain West, Grand County checked all my boxes, and I've really not looked back since I moved here. And I'm really thankful for the board that we have and a great staff and good community. So thank you all so much. I'd like to start with Stuart and Paula being our longer term board members. How you have seen, I'm curious to know how you have seen the organization change. So Stuart, most pertinent to you, over the last 6 or 7 years, how the organization has changed, how the community has changed, specifically with respect to the land trust. And then Paula, you as well, through your experience working with conservation groups, how you've seen the land trust change in the community. So Stuart, if you'd like to start,
Well, I think
reflecting on 7 years.
yeah, there are two, I think the two of the most significant changes that have occurred since I've been on the board, and this is not necessarily any thanks to me. One is we are in a much better financial footing, at least as far as our operations are concerned, going forward than we've ever been before. When I first joined the board, finances were a year-to-year thing, and the hope was that, you know, some application for a conservation easement coming through the door and we could survive on the fees that we raised. You know, we could maybe keep employees for the rest of the year, but next year didn't look so good unless something good happened. And fortunately, some good things happened. For a while, we had a very effective grant writer that helped a lot. And then the board as a unit became better at directing fundraising and being involved. And part of that relates to the second thing that's the biggest change in the land trust since I've been on the board, and that is the stability. My first several years on the board, things were very unstable. We went through 2 executive directors and 2 long periods without an executive director. And the worst part of that second one of those was that I was essentially acting as the executive director, which wasn't getting it. But when Jeremy's coming on, things have been much more stable in that way. I believe we have a much higher profile in the community, albeit I think we could go higher on that. And so I won't talk about the future yet, because I'm sure that's a topic that's going to come up. But anyway, those are the 2 really substantial changes that I've seen in my years on the board.
And Paula, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say that because, you know, I haven't lived here as long as Stuart has, but I think that one of the challenges that has increased is the number of second homeowners. And, you know, we've dabbled a little bit in terms of reaching out with one direct mailing. And as Quillen said, you know, there are a lot of people come from the Front Range to this area and really enjoy the resources, the fishing, the hiking, and skiing, obviously, mountain biking that this area has to offer, but don't really participate in thinking about how to preserve them, those resources for the future. And I think that's to me, it's a challenge going forward that has only increased since I've been involved this last 3 years, because just looking around me where I live here in Fraser, I mean, there've been so many more units built, and the place where people store their skis that live here in Rendezvous is just overwhelmed with people and their kids. And I think that's a huge challenge that yeah, I'm not saying we're not up to it, but I think that communication and education, not only of the people who live here and vote here, but also the people who come here on a part-time basis is something that I've seen, you know, the numbers are changing to the increase of the influx, you know, for people. So that to me, I mean, I think that we have a great group of people, and we really we're all passionate. I mean, I don't think there's anyone that is involved with this group that doesn't think that what we do is important. So, you know, that makes it so much more enjoyable, to be honest. So
Great. Well, thank you for those answers. Turning to Ray and Jennifer for a second. So Ray, when you purchased your property, it came with a conservation easement, albeit not held by us. And so I'm curious to know if that conservation easement played a role in purchasing your property and getting more involved with the land trust, if you can elaborate on that.
You know, it was certainly at the forefront of what I was going to do in the future. The parcel that was encumbered was through Cattlemen's Trust, which is one of our major competitors, but it covered about half of our property. And so on a regular basis, you know, their monitoring group would come out and visit, and we'd have coffee and a cocktail or whatever at happy hour. They'd go out and take photos, and but it was always interesting to hear their stories about the process of conservation easements. The one thing we found in our area is that when you do an easement, you're giving up rights to your land to develop it. So therefore, that usually translates into a loss in value. Interestingly enough, in our area, the prices for land on ranches is about the same, whether it's encumbered by an easement or not. You know, so it's more of a challenge for us as we try to convince landowners to do this going forward, because, you know, one of the incentives, of course, is to go ahead and pick up some land tax credits on the way. So that's a big challenge, and it's really, you know, it's charged with appraisers and what their process is to figure out if that works. But that being said, you know, certainly this trust has picked up a number of easements, and the values did show a loss in value for that perpetual easement. So therefore, the landowner did get tax credits as a result. So.
Okay. And I will clarify, and this is a conversation that land trusts have pretty frequently. Colleagues bring it up. We don't like to consider ourselves competitors, right? Because our missions are ultimately the same. And it's, but it is, you know, it's always a struggle when a landowner comes to one of us and decides to go with another one. But ultimately, we're all in the same boat. But thank you for that background, Ray. And Jennifer, since you've taken classes in conservation, you've kind of gotten involved in the field more recently. How has the last couple months being on the board translated? How have you applied your schoolwork to this, and how might you bring it back, or calling your professors and saying, hey, this is, you know, boots on the ground, this is what I've learned?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my first class through Harvard was a land conservation class, and the majority of the class was spent on easements, and it was it's a practical, or I would say it's an applied class taught by former Nature Conservancy, people that, or executive directors of other land trusts. And so that's really, I honestly, I didn't really know what land trusts were even before that class. And so that was a big eye opener for me to understand, what's easement, what is it really doing? How does it work? Why does it make sense? And I think what's fascinating about it is that the US is really the forerunner on the whole easement process. And what a great way and method to protect open space and land through kind of the easement process. And I think that we're seeing that in Grand County specifically. As Stuart mentioned, we have the historic agriculture properties, we have the beautiful vistas, we have biodiversity here that probably warrants saving as well. So all of that has really been great to see through the efforts that the land trust does, not only with the easements that they have in place, but with the ongoing activity of trying to solicit new easements, really with this goal of, forwarding kind of conservation, whether that's for climate change, whether that's just for longevity and having a tie to the land and a legacy. All those are important, and it has aligned almost perfectly well with all of the teachings that I was able to gather through that land conservation class. So it's been great.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Thank you for that. And so with Quillen, so recently out of school, you joined the land trust. When you were going through school and kind of envisioning career or a job pathway in conservation, as you and I have talked about otherwise, were land trust part of it? Was private land conservation part of that thought, or were you really casting a wider net?
I was casting a wider net. Unfortunately, I found because I didn't take an environmental science route or some policy route, there weren't a lot of options that were suggested or even like that I learned about through my professors. I came out of school thinking that I was either going to have to only do like animal assisted therapy, or B, I don't even know, not do what I wanted to do, essentially. And which I think is a shame, because for someone who doesn't have a really strong math and science background, but can communicate with people, I feel like social work can be a really broad and helpful thing if you can be a resource to people. It doesn't necessarily have to mean you're giving folks therapy. But yeah, I ended up just kind of going rogue and looking into job boards. And I know that I've had communications and development experience in the past, and I like that realm. And I feel like it really fits well with what I studied in school. So I just looked for any nonprofits or anyone that was doing some sort of communication development that had something to do with either conservation work or conservation policy or anything like that. But I think when you go into those roles and you don't have that science background, again, there are always questions as to like, why is a social worker applying for these positions? But I think there's a benefit to that as well, of like, I don't know all the good, great, smart lingo, but I know how to like break it down for people who don't also have those degrees as well, and make the content more approachable. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, I wanted to turn back to Paula, but you're walking. It's all right. You're muted there.
Wait, that's okay.
Yeah.
Am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. I had to take the dog out, sorry.
All right.
I've got to get off in 5 minutes, so.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, in case we're busy talking when you do have to go, thank you so much for joining us, Paula, for this evening. And I'll use this opportunity as a brief break to again pitch our event on Sunday for Hats Off for Headwaters in person, which will be at Casa Vista outside of Fraser. You can meet a lot of our board and our staff there, as well as community members. There is an online silent auction going on. Every panel this week, I've had a different painting behind me. This one will also be, is in the auction. It's a beautiful watercolor of the Tetons up outside of Jackson, yeah. So you can bid on that, and we have a lot of other great items in the auction. You can also watch the previous two panels on our website and on YouTube, and feel free to get in touch at any time through our website, coloradoheadwaterslandtrust.org. So I want to get back to, Quillen mentioned this balance between kind of the social sciences of communication and really getting out there, and the harder sciences that we often think about when we think of environmental science or conservation. And so this I'm going to open up to everybody. What do you think is the balance there between that hard science and social science? Having been trained in anthropology, I'm reluctant to call it a soft science, but the social sciences, how those two balance in conservation and in the land trust world, since we don't do a whole lot of scientific monitoring specifically. So if anyone just wants to jump in, or I'll call on someone.
Can I jump in for a minute? Because I do have to sign off. I think that I have two children who took, one went, well, both went into the arts. But my son was, actually had a course in high school called environmental science. I mean, when I went to school many decades ago, that obviously didn't exist. And so when I was first working in the 70s, it was, yes, it was a matter of looking at the Clean Air Act had just been passed and the Clean Water Act. And so I think that as a world population, we have a very different view today than I certainly had 40 years ago of what's important, and the values that we hold important. Obviously family and children, if you have them, but it's just a changed world, and I think we're still trying to adapt to what those changes mean. And my husband and I were just in Alaska in July and talked to some of the guides that we had about and how the glaciers are shrinking, and saw giant pieces break off right in front of us. And we're glad we weren't in Zodiacs when that happened, but it's very frightening, and it can be overwhelming. So I feel like working to preserve land is one small part of trying to do something to leave the world a better place. So
Beautiful.
So I have to say goodnight. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I'll open the question to everybody else of how you see kind of what is good training to be in conservation, what's the right mindset to have, math versus, social sciences, communication, what's some of the foundation there?
Piggybacking off of what Paula said, I mean, I think all the roles are very important. I grew up in a household where my dad is very scientific and worked for the US Geological Survey and doesn't have much time or patience to break things down for people. And I saw how in some spaces that can really work to his advantage and get people listening. And in other spaces, that's just not how you're going to get through to people. I find myself part of several different communities in Colorado, and some of them have very different viewpoints than I do in terms of environment or climate change and environmental change and conservation. But I think, like Paula said, we do typically have the same values. And if you can break it down and kind of get away from the doomsday metrics of the science and really explain it and explain what could happen that could make things better versus like what we're actually doing now that is not helping this issue. I tend to find that you get on the same page with people really quick, and it kind of eliminates that mistrust that unfortunately there's just like more and more of. Yeah.
I'll pipe in because
Yeah.
I'm also now taking an ecology class, which obviously is very science-based. And my professor, who has grown up through the Harvard system of ecology and done projects, for a while, ecology science was done for just kind of the sake of science, right? Like that was the goal. And, we talked about this last night where it has really shifted to, what is the goal of, ecological science? It's actually now more about conservation. So I think it's important that we understand, the science is important so we understand biodiversity, keystone species, what are things that are, important to protect. Now that tends to happen on large scale situations, like in the Amazon or, in Africa, what have you. But I think for a land trust level, while we're not out there measuring and monitoring biodiversity data, we don't need that strong ecological presence, so to speak. I think what we go back to, though, is just the cultural aspect of conservation and nature. It goes back to the basic premise of how nature benefits people, mentally, physically, emotionally. And so that's where land trusts really, I think, have a strong part to play. It might, ecological data is important and the science is important, but for a land trust specifically, especially a small one, people understanding that inherent value of nature and the appreciation of it, which is what the land trust does through the easement process, I think is imperative. So getting people back to nature, understanding the value of it is critical, and land trusts are right in the mix of that.
Great.
I come at this from a more social sciences perspective. I don't know if I call it that particularly, but I look at, I mean, to me, yeah, the science is good, but the impulse to save the land, to me, doesn't come from a scientific perspective. And I think, frankly, we have several audiences as a land trust. One audience is obviously donors, people who support us. But another audience, and a very important audience, is landowners. And I think a lot of the landowners that we deal with, and particularly the ones that we would like to do more with, such as ranchers and so on, to protect their land, I think come at conservation perhaps from a more emotional perspective than just a scientific one. And so I think that's very important that we keep that in mind as we work with our landowners and potential landowners, because I suspect that, yeah, there's an economic perspective as well, but I guess that's a social science too. But I think it's also a very emotional thing, and we always have to keep aware of that in terms of thriving as an organization.
Sure. For the two economists in the room, would you agree that economics is a social science? Well, Ray, do you want to chime in? You haven't.
Sure. You know, I think we're fortunate to live in the best country in the world, and with all the resources to try to achieve these goals and protect the environment. What you worry, you know, I think we're sitting with 6% of the land area in the world and 4% of the population. So for all we do, the scary part is that there's so many countries that are in the development stage that really can't address these issues. They're focused on industrialization, feeding their population, and so on. So, you know, as much of an example as we try to give the world, I think there are other things out there that are, you know, probably take precedent. So we do have the luxury, because of our resources, to address these things. But you do worry about the rest, you know, because it's really have an effect on the planet.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So we do have a number of supporters here in the audience, and if anyone does have a question that you'd like to pose to the group, feel free to either unmute or raise your hand or post in the comments. Otherwise, I certainly always have more questions to ask. So I'm going to go into my next one, but excuse me, for those of the audience, please feel free to speak up. So as Stuart mentioned earlier, you know, I asked about the history of the organization a little bit. And I'll go into that in a second, but I'm going to segue this into what the five of us kind of view as the future of the organization, some of our own hopes and dreams. I'll give a brief background of the organization just to give some context that we were founded in 1995 as the Grand County Land Conservancy. And this came about because there was a fairly significant meadow outside of Fraser that was under pretty severe threat of development. The owner had kept it open for a long time and said, we're going to sell it, and made every move indicative of selling it for development. And the way that the story is developed, the way it was told to me, was that Grand County Land Conservancy was founded on Monday and the land was sold on Tuesday. And so our ball wasn't rolling fast enough to stop that. But 28 years later, we now have 66 conservation easements, 9,310 acres under easement in the county, and we're just moving forward at a pretty good pace. After about a little less than a decade, we changed our name to Middle Park Land Trust, and from 2003 to 2013 was kind of our heyday. Looking through the files, Middle Park Land Trust, that's when we conserved most of the properties we have under easement today, and really started getting our feet under us and really making waves as a local land trust. And then in 2013, we changed our name again to Colorado Headwaters Land Trust as a greater focus of our geographical area. Middle Park is loosely defined as Grand County, but it extends a little bit outside. And the board at the time really wanted to focus to say, you know what, we only work in Grand County. And beyond that, we are really only focused on the headwaters of the Colorado River. I spoke about the river with Eric on Monday and then yesterday as well in relation to conservation. And so in the last 8 or 9 years or so as Colorado Headwaters Land Trust, and the easements that we've closed on and the supporters that we've gained have really been through focusing on the waterways, on the Colorado River, on the Fraser River, on the Williams Fork, on the Blue and the Muddy and the Troublesome, a lot of the headwaters and early tributaries to this very important and very loud river on the national stage right now with the drought going on and the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. So that was a very brief history, and we're moving forward at a pretty good clip. Our strategic plan that we put in place about 1.5 years ago had a goal of at least 1 easement a year. We wanted a good handful of events every year, really try and show ourselves to the community and have the community come up behind us. And so I'll start with Stuart since he has that history look as well. What do you see as kind of what are your hopes and dreams for the next few years of the organization?
Well, yeah, what I see, and it's consistent somewhat with my hopes and dreams. The thing that I see we will do more of, I hope, and we're certainly trying to now with our project in Granby, is do a few more public-private deals, if you will, like the one we did in Hot Sulphur Springs, the was it Jones Creek easement that we took a conservation easement, and then shortly after that, the fee interest in the property was sold to the town of Hot Sulphur Springs, and so it's now a Hot Sulphur Springs Park. And we're working with Granby to do a similar situation on land that Granby already owns. And I think these things are important, and I think we'll have more opportunities as unfortunately growth comes to the county, because the municipalities are going to need, I think they're going to want to balance what they're doing with some efforts from us. I think the thing that I really would like to see us do, and we're just, we haven't hit the sweet spot yet, but we will, but I would like to be the go-to place for the agricultural community who is thinking about, protecting their properties for future ranching activities, as opposed to being sold just for development. That we're the go-to organization for that. We need more contacts in that community as part of it. We also need to build up, and this is just a long-range plan, more sources of the kind of revenue that's required to do those kinds of deals. And we've gotten better at that. There's no question about it. And I think that we will improve, but I think that's going to be, those things will go hand in hand. And then once we're there, where we have the avenues to the resources, if you will, and perhaps some more connections with ag owners of ag property in the county, that we can improve and increase on that. So that's certainly what I hope for.
That's great. Jennifer, do you have, you've been with the organization for a few months, but when you joined us, you did speak of kind of a long-term vision. How has that vision evolved even the last couple of months, and what do you see as the next steps in the next couple of years for the Land Trust?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like, one of the things that I liked that Jeremy, you and I had talked about when I joined was really making sure we're representing all parts of Grand County, not just kind of the, Winter Park, Fraser, Granby corridor, that we're really looking, making sure we're looking further east. And so I would like to see that continue. I think there's a lot of value in the rest of Grand County. The other thing that, that I would love to see is, and Paula touched on this, is, in some ways, Grand County's population and boundaries are fluid, because you do have people, especially Front Range, and I'm one of them, that kind of come up and go back, come up and go back. And I think that the people, especially young families like myself, need to better appreciate the resources that, that they're taking advantage of and utilizing. And some of them don't even think about it, right? Like, oh, this drive is so beautiful. Well, yeah. Do you know why it's beautiful? That's an easement. That's an easement. That's an easement. So, having participation and more awareness and exposure to more than just Grand County for support. I think that would be a real, great strategic vision going forward and help us actually fulfill our mission further.
Excellent. Ray, you would like to chime in?
I think the state has had some effect on the pace of easements now too, because they did increase the amount that you could take for tax credits. That's been increased to 90%. And of course, those tax credits in Colorado are transferable and can be sold. So that's a big deal for, say, a longtime ranching family. So because of those two factors, I think the pace of getting more land conservation easements is going to increase going forward as the word gets out and they realize there's some economic benefit to that.
All right. Well, Quillen, since you're going to be the one talking about this on the stage, how do you feel about that? More easements coming our way, a greater supportive base.
It sounds like I'm going to be very busy.
As a 6-month review, how do you see the next couple of years playing out here at the office and our communications and how we communicate with others?
I think I'm looking at it, and I think kind of a benchmark in terms of measuring success is really increasing engagement of not our typical constituents we see in Grand County. Like I mentioned earlier, I would love to bring people in from the Front Range that read about our events and want to learn more about land trusts in general, or are very interested in, I don't know, the recreation opportunities that the county has to offer and wants to learn, how you don't have to use the land in order to love it and appreciate it. And there's different ways to conserve without building a bike trail on a piece of property, which is great and all, but we don't need them all the time. So yeah, I see more people in the database, me writing a lot more emails, just me getting busier. And then definitely seeing more engagement with events and more consistency with our events as well. And I think we were off to a good start this summer, and we had a lot of really great ideas, and they were quality events, and I'm excited to see where that goes. And I think also to collaborate with other organizations too would be really, really great to see us partner, whether it be in an event or a campaign or something along those lines would be really fun.
Great.
Yeah.
And well, all of these answers really did point to both our focus, geographic focus, saying, well, we only work here in Grand County, but let's communicate with the Front Range and beyond. But then also the diversity of the land, diversity of the landowners, between Stewart's statement about agriculture and the ranching heritage that we have here in Grand County, as well as the recreation and the scenic, and as Jennifer said, driving down the highway and just enjoying the views, a lot of which are ranches and agricultural operations, but the people driving might not be associated. And so the land trust is certainly at that intersection. Turn to the audience again. If anyone does have, someone did raise their hand. Who's this? Doris. Doris, you can speak or chat as you'd like.
Well, I'm interested in knowing if there is a role for volunteers shy of becoming a board member. Are you developing ideas for ways for individuals who aren't knowledgeable particularly, but passionate to support what the board and the staff are doing?
I can answer that briefly. Hi, Doris. Also,
Hi.
Nice to meet you on here. So I know that Jeremy and I have mentioned here and there as we've gone through a lot of our events, opportunities for volunteering in the future. So whether that be helping lead our wildflower walk or tabling or any of those kind of opportunities. I don't think we have anything set in stone yet, but I know that I'm hoping that next year we'll have some more volunteer opportunities, especially in the summer for folks. And I think that's a really great way, not only to engage with people in the county, but also to engage with students as well. I found that when I was in school, undergrad and grad school, volunteer opportunities kind of helped me a lot, realize how broad my degree could be. So I'd like to have that be an opportunity for folks. Plus, you're not the best volunteer, I gotta be honest, Hodor. So he's a little bit noisy.
Jennifer, you unmuted?
Yeah, I just was going to ask Doris. I think that that's a great suggestion for us to really try to augment volunteer opportunities. Are there certain areas that you in particular, or that you or others that you might know, certain areas of volunteer activities that you're interested in? Is it being outside? Is it office clerical work? Would love to just get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm involved with a number of Grand County organizations, Friends of the Library, the History Association, Mountain Family Center, and I often just ask them what they need and jump in when they identify a need. So, I can't state that I could lead a wildflower hike or something like that, but I'm pretty flexible about supporting staff in the office or at an event. Just need to know what the need is and how you see volunteers filling a role, because that does lighten the load for the others.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're just willing to help, which that's great. Thank you.
One of your excursions.
Yeah, I mean, volunteering, this has come up that, the land trust, we're not a management group. And so when when I think of on the ground volunteer projects, I often come up short doing what we do. But I tend to forget that someone could be helping out in the office, whether it's, like you said, clerical work or going to events. And so this is certainly going to be a focus for 2023 here at the office, is to expand that network of volunteers and active supporters. So great question. Thank you, Doris. So we have about 10 or so minutes left, and I'd like to open it up more as a broad open stage for the panelists here. If there's any reflection or something that you would like to say here, but also to the greater public about the land trust, about getting involved in your community or local conservation group such as ours. I'm sure that all of you have insights to share. If anyone would like to go first.
But you've been traveling, is what you've been doing.
Oh, Jerry, I'm going to put you on mute there. Oh. Well, I will start answering my own question. One of the pathways that led me to here was working with landowners and working with people who were already working on the land, ranchers and farmers, and getting to understand that the bridge between, I will say I was an environmentalist out of college, the bridge between an environmentalist and a rancher was pretty short. And I made that transition fairly quickly. And so that is something that I hope to really be able to push out. And this is something that people here tonight have already said, of really creating those bridges and bonding in the community to show that the land trust is the unifier. We can bring people from Winter Park and Fraser, as well as from Kremling and Grand Lake, all on the periphery of the county, and then Hot Sulphur and Tabernash and Granby, bring everyone together to really appreciate our open lands and our wildlife here in Grand County, because it is what we all share. Ray, you unmuted. Would you like to say?
Yeah, I remember when conservation easements went through a pretty rough patch at the beginning of from 2000 to 2005. And it's been a while of just trying to rebuild the image of conservation easements and the land trusts and so on. But there was a lot of fraud, with appraisals. And I know after we had bought our ranch, we had IRS agents crawling all over the place about a year afterward, auditing the previous owners, and so it was, and I know after that, the state did pass some more stringent rules and regs, and I think a number of appraisers lost their licenses along the way as well. But if you kind of think, but since then, I would say since 2005 or 6, you know, the land trusts in general have been gaining momentum, and their image has has increased substantially over where it was.
Yeah. Stuart, do you have anything to add to that? You were
Well,
nodding.
yeah, I think, Ray, the things didn't really get better until probably 2018 or 19, when they created the Office of Conservation in Dora. The problem was they went after taxpayers first, then they went after the appraisers, and then they were just the state, I can't remember, part of Dora that was doing it was just sort of anti-land trust.
It
so
was the Division of Real Estate.
Division of Real Estate.
Yeah.
So then that's who went after the appraiser. So it wasn't until the Division of Conservation was formed that things really started to loosen up. And then with the new law, it's made it a lot different. I mean, it's kind of interesting. The conservation easement as a thing is still very vibrant in Colorado. We briefly had an executive director who thought conservation easements were passé and had no real interest in doing them. This was before Jeremy's time.
I do not share that.
And you know, his notion was in landscape conservation and so on, which I think is valuable over time. But I think what we do in concentrating on securing easements and monitoring easements and protecting the land still has a significant role. You know, one thing that one of my law partners told me once, he did work for the Nature Conservancy. We have a huge, if you look at our balance sheet, we have assets that are ginormous. And the reason is because they're on our books at the value of the easements. But what we take on is really a perpetual obligation. It's an unusual thing, a conservation easement, because unlike any other interest in real property, it's perpetual. And we have the obligation perpetually to look after these things. So that's something that it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves over time. But so far, I think we're doing a pretty good job of it.
Thanks for that insight. In our last few minutes, if anyone else has anything to say, I'm going to take this opportunity again and pitch again the Hats Off for Headwaters, the fundraiser. Of course, the focus of this year's Hats Off is one, of course, supporting the organization as a whole, but then also specifically supporting a project that we're in hopefully the final stretch of funding, which is the Granby Highlands Trails Conservation Easement. This is a project for a 780-acre conservation easement within the town of Granby. The property is owned by the town, and this easement, when completed, will have 780 acres of open space plus 2 river miles of the Colorado River with fishing access. Of the 780 acres, 480 will be public access, multi-use non-motorized trails. So a public park walking distance, it's probably 2 miles at the stretch from my office here in downtown Granby. And then 300 acres on the northern side, contiguous with BLM and other open areas, will be a wildlife preserve, a no access zone to benefit the wildlife, including both a lot of our charismatic megafauna like moose and elk and antelope, as well as some endangered species. And so this project in and of itself is kind of covering all the bases around why we do conservation. We have the public access, we have the open space, we do have ranching culture in there, and then we also have water and wildlife. So this event, if you come on Sunday, you'll hear me talk more about it. I'll have a presentation. And then for the month of October, we'll be putting out more information. Quillen will be through our social media and emails to really drive some of that promotion. This is a really big project because it does put the land trust, of course, on the front page, hopefully, but also metaphorically, and benefits everybody. It is something that when no one can enter Grant County, or at least drive past Fraser, without really knowing about Granby and knowing what's going on. And if they do hit Granby, they're going to see it. They go to Kremling, they go to Rocky Mountain National Park. This park, the Granby Highlands Trails, will be front and center for them. And so that's a really big project that we're working on, and goes to show kind of the diverse array of easements that the land trust is capable of doing and have done in the past. So if there aren't any other questions coming in, if the panelists would like to have a final word, and then we'll release everyone to have their evening. Anyone want to say a final word of goodbye?
Please keep supporting the land trust.
Thank you, Stuart. Well, thank you to Ray, Queelan, Jennifer, Stuart, and Paula for joining us this evening for our third panel of Hats Off for Headwaters. This is the Land Trust panel, board and staff talking about the organization and some of our thoughts around it. I look forward to seeing everyone on Sunday or farther off down the road. Tune in for our next event, and then next year's Hats Off for Headwaters. We'll do this all over again. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all.